Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Flipping the Barrel podcast. We are so excited today because we get to interview Paula Harris, which you will learn so much about her on this episode. We've got the pleasure of actually meeting her in person here in Houston, and she is amazing. Like seriously, I've been so excited about this podcast because I haven't met someone like Paula ever, and she's inspired both Jamie and I. So we're so excited to share her oil field story. And let's get right into it. So Paula is a graduate of Texas A&M with a petroleum engineering degree. She traveled the world working 33 years for the oilfield giant Schlumberger. She began her career as an offshore field engineer, and she climbed her way all the way to being ESG as global director for Schlumberger before retiring in the summer of 2020. She didn't retire for too long, though. She is now, as of January 2021, the CEO of DPM Alliance Energy Group. She's also the author of 2 books, For Sister, The Guide for Professional Black Women, which helps first-generation professionals navigate corporate America. And her second book is When I Grow Up, I Want to Be an Engineer, a children's book focused on introducing girls and minorities to careers in engineering. We can go on and on about all the incredible things that Paula has done or is part of, but let's jump straight into her episode so we can hear it from herself.
Paula, we're so excited to have you on. And I just want to say that I remember the first time I saw you and I was in the Midland airport and I was sitting there and you were working away on your computer. You were on a call. You had all your luggage. Like I was just watching you. I was like, oh, I just wish I could just talk to her. At this time, I was working for Schlumberger and I knew who you were. And I was just like, there's just no way. And so I just sat there like, stalking you. And then, we went our separate ways. My flight left and then I never saw you again until I guess a few months ago when we were at Leslie's house. So it's really awesome to come full circle and to be here, actually recording an episode with you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so let's just jump right into it and get our listeners what they want. And why don't you tell us, a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what was life like growing up as Paula?
Right. So I am from Houston. Now, you don't meet many Houstonians in Houston. I'm a native Houstonian. Grew up in Sunnyside, which is the south side of town, in a very homogeneous African American neighborhood. We were first gens. My dad was military. All of our neighbors were military. All of these young African American guys bought their first homes using their GI Bills, right? And they just want to educate their families. And so we were, South Side. And I guess after I finished elementary, HISD had been charged with integrating schools since the 50s. And so now we're 20 years later in the 70s and they hadn't done it yet. And so they started a program which was called the M to M transfer, the minority to majority transfer. And it's real interesting because I have a strong interest in education. I served on Houston Education School Board for years, some years back now. And what they did was they kind of picked the smartest kids from the South Side and brought us into the Meyerland area, into the River Oaks area, into the Bel Air area, so that they would have a percentage of have some diversity in some of the schools. Never diversifying the schools in the South. No one was bused down there, but we were kind of the straight A students were bused inner city. And so that was my first ever. I mean, I was in a community where I went to church, I went to the grocery store, I went to school, all with our grandmothers and just generations of Houstonians. So that was my first time being in a diverse setting. And I can't say I was the most comfortable as a 7th grader and kind of being taken away from your friends, but that was the beginning of me understanding the value of diversity. And if I didn't see it then, I saw it later, because what happened when you're in a very blue collar neighborhood or family, your mom and your dad go to work. And so I was a kid that wanted to do student council, wanted to be a cheerleader, wanted to do after school activities. Well, you're bused. So you got to, at the end of the school day, get back on your bus and get back to Sunnyside. So I couldn't be on the pep squad and I couldn't be a cheerleader. And so my parents made the decision right after or during middle school to move to the suburbs of Houston. And so Whereas I was school day in a a pretty diverse. Well, it wasn't even pretty diverse. It was probably 5 to 10% African American students being bused over to Johnston Middle School at the time. Um, we went from there to moving out to Katy, where I was one of three kids in my high school of color, right? And so that also was shocking because now when I'm in the grocery store and when you're at church, we joined the Tanglewood Baptist Church. We were always the only Black family, which is very different for a middle school, high school child. But once again, I mean, you have to look at the positives and negatives of and recognize what they do to all kids, and all kids are different. It helped me prepare for Texas A&M petroleum engineering, you know, because if you come from a environment where you are in a homogeneous African American or a homogeneous Latin American or Mexican American community, or your school is 95% ESL, and then you go to Texas A&M, where you are one of the few girls, few children of color. There's this huge adjustment you had to make. But really, I'd kind of been making that adjustment for a while. Not to say it was still easy. It was a hard curriculum. It was and I knew nothing about engineering. So that, and a lot of these guys, they grew up in rural areas and they'd been on oil rigs and they'd been they have family members who are geologists or landmen or
their dads were in the industry or
dads were in the
yeah.
industry, and I knew no one. I hadn't been to one engineering camp. I spent my daughter, I made her go to camp every summer since the seventh grade, learned about engineering because I knew nothing. And it was just I acquiesced to my father, who saw that petroleum engineers made good money, and he.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
why
how
why did you end up at Texas A&M, and why petroleum
I
engineering
was a
exactly?
smart kid, and I was like, I think I want to do fashion design. I like clothes or accounting. I might be able to do accounting. I'm good at numbers. And so Dad, of course, looks back in the 70s and 80s, the Houston Chronicle, or could have been even the Houston Post at the time, Sunday paper front page. I remember it like yesterday. It had all the top paying jobs, and petroleum engineer every Sunday was the top paying job in the area. And so Dad says, I'm paying for a petroleum engineering degree. And they say Texas A&M has the best program, so I'm paying for a degree there, but you can go anywhere you'd like. But this is what I'm going to sponsor. So I was like, what? And I remember, because remember, I'm out in Katy with and I'm the only little, the Black cheerleader, little Black student council kid. So I still got to do all the extracurricular, and I have some great friends that I still stay in contact with some today. They're like, your dad picked your major? You don't even get to say what you want to do? And I'm like, y'all get to say?
You're like, I didn't think that was an option.
He told me what to do, and I have to go do it.
Yeah. Well, he said, this is what I'll pay for if you do
Well,
anything else,
That's
and
true.
you're like, okay, well, if you're going to pay for it, that's what I'm going to end up doing.
That's because I have no money for college.
Well,
so it was a good experience. And that's kind of how I grew up and kind of even got my first, that's how I landed in the industry.
yeah. So about that, getting into the industry, what was your first job when you graduated? And was it what you thought it was going to be like? Especially having this experience of always being like the only woman, maybe the only, African American, and now you're going into an industry where you're really the only woman, and not to mention, diversity at this time was probably pretty, hard to come by versus, of course, the Middle East, there's a vast amount of oil, and there's diversity there, but in Houston, I'm sure that was difficult.
Well, and when you talk about gender diversity, the Middle East is probably worse than we are because they're light years behind us. But I'm gonna tell you, you start being prepared since the seventh grade, and I got into it. I like this major. I understand this major. I know the people, my professors, and so I worked for. It was Mobil. It wasn't Exxon Mobil. I worked for Mobil and Summers, and it wasn't Chevron. It was Gulf Oil. They paid for my scholarships, after I got to A&M, and so I'm going to work for a company. I'm going to work for an oil company, hey, I'll be a reservoir engineer, maybe a drilling engineer. How about a production engineer? And in 1987, when I graduate, the bottom falls out. So I'm like, oh, Dad, you got me in this major. It's supposed to make all this money. He had seven sisters, and they're all teachers. So I'm like, I'm just going to go teach somewhere. But I was working in the department for the department head in the office, and I graduated in May. I didn't have a plan, and the petroleum engineering department needed their student workers to work through the summer. So, I had an apartment up there, so I'm just going to stay here. Mobil wasn't giving me an offer. Chevron had not given any of their interns offers. And so I was working there in the department at the office, and some guys, Schlumberger took some guys and sent them back to school, put them on a leave where they would just not pay them, but send them to school and give them some type of support while they're going back for their master's in petroleum engineering. And so they came to the petroleum engineering department, and I'm the office worker, and they said, do you have a job yet? And I was like, no, I graduated. I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm probably going to teach school. And they said, Schlumberger is actually going to hire we hired during good times and bad times. And we're going to hire this one class to work out of Lafayette. Just call this number. I was like, I don't want to work for Schlumberger. I called the number. Yes, send us your resume. I sent the resume. Yes, we'd like to interview you. And I'm telling you, after the interview, I was in a Holiday Inn, I think in Lafayette. And I'm pretty sure that's where the Gulf Coast Division office was for land. And I went back to my hotel and I cried. I was like, A, they're going to offer me this job. B, my dad's going to make me take this job. And I don't want to work for a service company. I don't want to be the one bringing the donuts. I don't want to be that guy,
Yeah.
So I was so miserable. And really, I tell my daughter and all young professionals this: attitude is altitude. I really wasn't a good JFE, junior field engineer, that first year because I didn't want the job. The guy that hired me said, well, we don't know if she's going to be able to make it. So let's send her somewhere where it's really going to be tough on her and see if she scratches her way through that. So he sent me to a district that didn't want me and I didn't want them. And, I actually made some good friends with my operators. I learned, but it's like you're working 14 and 7, and every 7 days I was coming back to Houston because I hated Houma, Louisiana. I never mixed or I never mingled other than work hours. And I think after a year, I had a new district manager, and he wasn't so bad, but he said, Paula, what do you want to do? Do you want this job? And I was like, well, I was thinking about moving back home. I was just that iffy. And he goes, what if we get you a job working offshore in Houston? And I'm like, heck yeah. More money, cleaner rigs, better bonus.
Close to home.
And at my mom's house, So it didn't, of course, it never happens like that. At first I went to Corpus and worked for a couple of years because that ended up where they needed me, but they did have me an apartment on the beach, and so I made it through that one. And then I worked most of my career at Houston Offshore. And, I had an apartment, and my parents were here, and I did my sales after that in Houston, and then Houston, North American recruiting. So, and then when I mentor young ladies or young engineers, I should have been much more aggressive on trying to get out of Houston. I should have been earlier in my career more aggressive about taking international and trying something new and being a little bit further away from home, because most of my career actually was in Houston. I did do stints, long terms in long short-term assignments in Perth, Australia, in Venezuela, Caracas, and I've seen the world 10, 11 times, but most of the positions were home-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we totally get it. I mean, Jamie and I both have always worked for a service company as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we also didn't know anything about oil and gas. So we didn't have a better option of like oil company versus service company. Like we just were like, I guess it's the same thing. But once I was in it, I'm like you, it's like, we do everything for everybody else. Like this part sucks.
Yes, there's no break.
We can bring the donuts.
That's what I was going to mention.
It's a fun job. at the same time, like it's kind of like, and I remember you mentioning this where you were looking at all your friends on the operator side and they were just like reservoir engineer 1, reservoir engineer 2, 3, and then it is a lot. It's such a different career. Some people do the transition, but I've seen it firsthand, very similar to you, where on the surface side, there's like, I feel like the world is your oyster. Like the amount of possibilities of things that you can do, it's awesome.
I mean, you can almost, and I know you know this, you can almost design your own job sometimes. You see a need and you feel it. You know, there's not a lot of oversight, and even there wasn't even a lot of standard operating procedures. You know, when I came on, we just did stuff, right? And it's just, as long as you got it done and got it done well. But you think about, oh, there's a need for me to go to a meeting or go train someone in Kuala Lumpur. Okay. That's part of my job, you know, so you don't ask, there's not a lot of people that have to sign off, you know, and that's pretty early in your career to sit up here and say, you know, this is what I need to do to meet my objectives and goals, and you just go do it, you know.
And that's what I was going to mention is the objectives and goals part. So when you are in service side and you're in sales, it's very black and white. You sold a job, they know you sold it, you met your goal, your objective. I feel that when you're in an engineering role, like how do you set objectives and how do you know you've reached that objective? Like, I think that is a difficult part in actually, getting your next promotion is what makes you a good engineer?
So as a field engineer, that's very interesting. And that's a great question because, I mean, there are a variety of things. You may be the most technical. You may be able to take tools completely apart and solder them and fix them right there offshore. So one of the things is your ability to be efficient and effective on a rig, right? So your ability to not have to wait on a chopper to bring out another tool or part, your ability to motivate people and have your guys always early, on time, working hard, pleasing the customers, your ability for safety and radiation and working with hazardous material, right? Your ability to sell up. You know, McDonald's in the only place that says you want some fries with that, you know?
Yeah.
And when we sell up, you know, $500,000, right?
Yeah.
And so all of that is part of the success story that you have, you know, and that you're measured on. I mean, how, you know, just how well you know. And then comes the next step where you go and you work in Lafayette at the training center and start training new students or new engineers. I have training new engineers, or you what I would do and what really kind of made me valuable is on my days off, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have a kid, I would go call recruiting and say, I want to go to Purdue and help recruit with you. Or how about if I go and here comes the yard man now. How about if I go and I worked on this Exxon job or mobile job, and now I'm going to go with you on my days off and help read, you know, look at the logs, understand their needs, and just hang out with you as a sales engineer.
Yeah,
and so
you're always going above and beyond. You weren't just doing
always
your job.
looking for the next job. And so what happens then is so funny because the sales engineer, the sales manager may call and say, hey, I got a sales engineer going out on vacation. Paula, we're not going to ask your boss. You have to convince your boss to let you come over here for 2 weeks. You know, and you're like, I need to take me off the schedule. No, we can't do that. Maybe the third time.
Yeah.
You know, so your ability to influence others, your ability to add value in your next spot, your ability to show that you are, you know, a good engineer and you're solid and you finished all your promotions, because there's definitely this promotional ladder that you had to do to get to senior field engineer and general field engineer. And after that, everyone has their different, you know, ways that they are showing that they're a good engineer. Now, so that was the problem with me. I went and I did all of my sales. I went and did vacation relief for sales. So who did they ask for when they needed a new sales engineer? They asked for Paula.
Yeah.
So there were guys who had more time than I did. There were guys that had more, that were probably more technical. And I mean, they were upset. And I had 7 years in the field. So it wasn't like it was, I'd just been there a day or two. But back then, you spent a lot longer in the field. So she only got it because she's a woman. She only got it because she's Black. I really got it because they requested me, because that's where I spent my days off. I didn't, you go home to your wife and kid, and I get it, I understand it, but I went and worked with sales.
No, that's a very valid point. I'm glad you shared that with us, because that does happen a lot. And you do all because you're a woman, or, maybe you're a minority, they automatically think that, you had the upper hand, but they didn't really see what you did, behind the scenes.
On your days off and all that
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
So back then, which was, I mean, you were in Schlumberger for 33 years. So let's go back many, many years. What was it like to be in the field as a woman back then, especially offshore, being the only woman on a ship? Like, did they know what to do with you?
I promise
I
you.
can't even
And
imagine.
because things were so busy, and Schlumberger, now you look at us, and we're pretty flexible now, but we were so arrogant. We really were. And anyone from back in that day, now we will say, and we still have this reputation as we're arrogant, but we are nothing like we used to be. I mean, no discount here, when you need a bid here, look at our price book and you figure out how much, what do you want?
There wasn't 100 other wireline or other companies
Exactly.
doing that. It's like you had an option and you named
And that was it.
Exactly. Everybody wanted Schlumberger. We were the top dog, and we are still technology wise, but we have to be more amenable to with clients than we used to be. So let's just say every time I hit a rig, I was 99.9% the only female. Chevron, I mean, there may have been one or two other women that I may see as geologists. No company man, nobody on the floor, no other service companies had females. And so I really give Schlumberger a lot of credit for supporting us and putting us out there, because I was by far not the first, but there were not many, one in every district. I can't remember. I didn't work with another female probably till I've been with Schlumberger about 5 or 6 years. But every district almost had at least one. And I would call out to the rig and say, I'm coming out. And you may have someone say, well, we don't have any place for a woman. And I'm like, so you don't want to engineer, or you want to make a place?
Make one.
And at first, that first year, I was so insecure and afraid. And you got the chopper ride, you're getting up on the basket off the boat, and it's such a big deal. Woman on board, and looks like half the rig is out there hiding from the police or from the authorities.
Oh my gosh. I could.
You're like, don't worry.
There's an
about
alien.
me.
We don't know what to do.
Exactly. I'm like, don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. I'll just stay with my guys. I had great relationship with my guys, and and they were very respectful. So no, I can be in the bunk with them, and nothing special. Just pretend I'm not here. I'm just like the guys. And then once I became really sure of myself as adding value, and you're not going to run me off, and I'm a great engineer too, but I'm different. So I would hit a rig and it's woman on board. And it's like, what are we going to do with her? And we're sitting there looking at the room and board. And I'm like, well, if you move this guy over there, and then I can go into the medic room.
Yeah. You need to start speaking up and owning it.
You do. You become sure of yourself. And I'm telling you, 10 years out of the field, there would still be guys that would see me out and say, you remember me from that rowing rig? And I'm like, I promise you, there were a lot of guys.
Yeah,
I don't remember it.
No, I don't. But people will remember because I was a kind of the unicorn out there. But you look back and it was fun. Now there were, every Christmas I'm on a job and I'm sitting here looking at these guys with no fingers, and we're having Christmas dinner, and I'm on the satellite radio, real staticky, calling home saying, what are y'all eating? What are y'all doing?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But it really makes you who you are. Being in the oil industry with our service mentality and our safety mentality, I don't care who you are. It changes who you are in that you understand client relationships. and you understand safety. Those are just two things you're going to walk out
Mhm.
with. And then with the global, once you become, when you just jump on flights and head to different corners of the world, it completely changes you. It defines me now. Understanding, being in a place where you know no one, you don't speak the language, you see the love a mother has for its newborn baby, Jamie. It's the same. You just recognize the similarities, and no matter where you're from, no matter what your living conditions, if you're developed or undeveloped, whether you have electricity or not, you see people and what they want from life for themselves and their children.
Mm, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And that actually segues right into one of our questions about when you had your daughter. So when we first talked, you were, Schlumberger was your end all be all. And I can totally relate to that now that I just had a daughter. And before this, I swear I was like, work was it. Like, that's
Yep.
all I thought about. That's all I did. That's all that mattered. And so you had your first child when you turned 36, and you lived your life until then just focusing on your career, and how a lot of women, and I can say even for myself, it's scary when you have your first child. You wonder what's going to happen, and people always tell you, once you see the baby, your whole life's going to change. We're going to stay home. Well, and that's not the case for everybody, and of course that wasn't the case for you, just like it's not for me. But it does impact your career, and it can be in a positive way or a negative way. Can you explain kind of how having the baby, what that did for your work-life balance, and also how that made you a better person?
So that's an excellent question, Jamie, because you say positive or negative effect of your work, but you have to look at it as a whole. It affects your life so
Yeah.
positively.
Mhm.
So you're
Yeah.
like, you know, you do have to wake up and say, I don't think I want to be the CEO, which I could, I just won't see my kid much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to spend time with her too. So that, it makes you have to find the balance. I will never forget because I was older. I was 36 years old and I didn't have 35, I didn't have a husband and I didn't have a kid. And I was like, I got to go get some of those because I'm about to be out of my 30s. So let me go find a husband and a kid. And I had a global position then. I was doing sales training. I mean, every Monday morning, every Sunday afternoon, I was in a Continental, getting on an international flight to go teach a sales training class wherever in the world it may be. And when I found out I was pregnant, the day I found out I was pregnant, I had to head to Cairo, Egypt for a 2-week stint. And once it got close to the end, I was like, there's always an issue with African American women and pregnancies and high risk pregnancies and so as I got close to the end, you're just edema and you have all these things going on in your body. And I'll never forget, someone called me and said, Paul, I can't make it to Mexico. And you're right there in Houston. We had a team of about 7 sales trainers. We were jumping across the globe. And I had pretty much told them I couldn't travel. And there's no way I would tell Schlumberger no to anything. You don't tell Schlumberger no. You got a job. The dispatcher calls, your beeper goes off way before cell phones and
Yeah.
says, you got a job. And you get out to the rig. You get to the job. So someone called and said, my visa's not right. I can't get to Mexico. And is there any way you can go teach this class and get to Mexico? And I mean, I didn't even think about it. I said, I can't do it. I cannot take the risk of eating some bad lettuce and being away from my doctors and
Mhm.
getting really, really sick in Mexico. I just can't do it. And that was the beginning of me trying to balance and find a way to still be an excellent employee, to really give it my all, and at the same time be an excellent mom. And sometimes I was, that
It's
excellent word
hard.
thrown away,
Mhm.
thrown around a lot.
I think
Sometimes,
it sounds easier said than done
oh, it
because
is.
especially like as someone as yourself that's just been like bleeding work and that's
Mhm.
been your focus and the not saying no. I think like Jamie and I are one of those people, like we always just say yes. There is no other
Good.
option.
That's
But
it.
now you have a family that
Mhm.
you also need to learn to balance. On that topic, this is a hard one that I hear a lot of women who have their first child or of kids, and they seem to think that most companies, not necessarily just oil and gas, but in general, don't necessarily have all the support that they wish they would have had from a company to make them successful. It almost seems like sometimes women could have been up and coming, you were global sales, and you can get to a certain level in a company, which for women is a very small percentage, but then now you have a kid, so on top of that it adds even more stress and struggles and challenges. What do you think companies can do for moms who still want to be CEO, or at least make their career as high as possible, but also have a kid? Like I think it's hard, but what could companies do? I don't know.
So a lot of companies are even doing it, and even more are going to do it after COVID, after this exercise of working from home, right? But I'm going to tell you, back then, there was no dads. I have so many friends whose kids felt like, I never want to be my kid won't be an engineer because they say I never saw him. So that dads don't even want to give that up anymore, like they did in the 70s and 80s. They want to see and love and know and be at baseball games. So companies don't even have to just make the adjustment for women. They have to make these family life adjustments for, to hire the best people now. At the same time, the whole thing about letting someone stay home for a while and then re-enter. I mean, they're still a smart, talented, technical person. They just needed to, whereas before it's like, I'm going to take a year off. That was the death of you, where you're done here. Well, companies have, and they need to be flexible enough. I mean, when I had Madison, I had 6 weeks off. And I came back in August, and then September 1st, they're like, okay, now everybody gets 6 months off for. I was like, men, and now they give men and women 6 weeks, and I had to get back to my job. So you're in a broom closet pumping, or it was terrible. But they have made big strides now to be more family friendly and family focused. I mean, bottom line, companies want a return on their investment. They want to make sure you're producing. They want to make sure that you're an effective employee. And if that takes, you have to decide how much of that you're going to give, no matter what. But now that people are working from home and companies are seeing how that works, you're going to see more folks hire you and say, oh, you have 2 kids, you got to leave at 3:00. And it's going to be beneficial to the companies, because if you notice, people don't stop working now. There is no fire. Right? So I think we will see creative ways to make sure moms and dads can, be talented, share their talents, and still be just concerned and considerate of you needing to have family time.
And I can say from my experience now, that's definitely what happened. My husband works in the oil field as well. His company totally understood the situation we were in, completely supported it. They even paid to help us, clean the house one time. And I was like, this is crazy. Who does that? So, I mean, it definitely, they see the need to support their employees. And, I've been told by my boss, oh, bring Kylie to the cook-off, or bring Kylie to the lunch. Clients don't care. They're like, oh yeah, no, we hear in the background, no big deal. The flexible work, people are the one positive thing about COVID is the ability for us to work at home, and our bosses to understand that nothing changes. And our CEO totally gets it too. I mean, they all have seen how successful we've been through 2020 and a horrible downturn, and we're still selling jobs, we're still running operations, still doing everything, with people, working from home. So I think that really,
I think that your generation in Silicon Valley, right? Because we're having to compete with folks who go get your laundry done at work, bring your dogs to work. You got the barista at Google, you got your own little Starbucks, and we're saying, you're on call for 24 hours, 14 days a week, and then only off 7.
It's a hard sell.
Like, no, we're not coming there. We're going to Silicon Valley. We're top students in engineering or in STEM majors. We're going to go over there. We can take our dog and ride a bike, and there's a pool table or a ping pong and foosball right there.
There is one thing though that I don't think really has changed yet, and that is, so many women leave when they're mid-level career, and that is, where Macy and I are basically getting to, and that is when you do have children, and we are talking about how companies are being more supportive, but at the same time, we have seen where women just get stuck in these roles and then they don't become visible anymore, and then all of a sudden there's like a lack of promotion, and then there's still those people who still think that
Oh,
because you have
absolutely.
have the child, like, all of a sudden, your attention somewhere else. What can we do to make sure that we keep those women?
Well, they have to be more flexible with them. They have to give them 6 months, a year off. And because, a lot of times people just need to exhale. It's a lot. Life is so overwhelming now.
Mhm.
I mean, and it's all part of the social media, the continuous news, the political, people are at the edge. So we are going to have to do some mental health time. And say you want to go home 2 years, and then HR is looking for you to come back, just and keep staying on track, So there will have to be some exceptions, and that's something that someone left Schlumberger. It's like put an X by her name. She never let her back. She's wrong, And now it's like let's give her a break and let her come back, and still continue moving. So those are the kind of changes that companies are really going to have to just really embrace, letting men and women, top
Mhm.
technical talent, find themselves, go, climb the Himalayas for 6 months. And, you know, these type of things are what this generation, they don't want the old IBM suit and tie every day for 33 years like I
Mhm.
did, going into the same office. They want to take a breather from work and come back. And I think companies are going to have to embrace that.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think too, which is very inspiring what you've done. And I think a lot of women who have gone to, a global level role like yourself in such a big company, or even C-level or CEO, is sure they have kids, but they don't let that be a single excuse towards their next promotion. So I think, yes, companies need to do, a lot to be flexible, but I think it has to stem from you, kind of like when you came back and they said you're going to Perth, Australia, you're like, okay, let's go. Let's grab this six.
Yep. Yep.
My baby's going to stay with my parents-in-law for 6 weeks. I'm going to make this happen. Like, not a lot of women would do that. So
No,
kudos to you.
no.
And I think that's why you've been so successful, is we can't forget all the sacrifices that you've done, or that other women who get to those levels do, right? Because it's not just, oh, I need the company to be a little bit more flexible,
Mhm.
but you also need to still have that insane drive and sacrifice to,
And so it's just asking both to
play.
sacrifice, right? Because we've been sacrificing. If we stayed on and we had kids and women have sacrificed. And so we're just asking the companies to do the same thing. Because if you're going to climb up a corporate ladder, and have kids and have a husband, and there are just some sacrifices that my daughter loves to egg me and say, dad was always there, whatever. But they're just asking. So you're exactly right. There's some things that from leaving my young baby, and going to Perth for an extended amount of time, to taking her with me to Venezuela for a long project, and not being in the safest situation, but never ever thinking to say, well, now I changed my mind, I'm not going to do this special project. Then that's just what we've done, and you miss a lot of special moments. So to balance that, I think companies need to recognize it, and I think they have to. I think they're going to, because, like I said, the guys
The
are different.
generation too.
This
Mhm.
Mhm.
generation overall is different, and companies are recognizing, to get just as much or more from your employees, you want to feed into them, what they need for that balance.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's talk about personal branding, which you have an amazing brand, and especially internal. So you need to have a personal brand within your career where people know who Paula is. Now, you worked for a company that had, 100,000 plus employees at some point. How did you make it to become a global director, or even get to such a high level with I mean, you've got 99,000 other people competing against you. How did you make it? What do you think made you stand out? Do you think it was because of your personal brand and the fact that you were knocking on people's doors and saying, hi, I'm Paula and I work in the field and I want to be friends with you? Or
So absolutely, that's part of it. I tell a story. I love New York. New York is one of my favorite places. So as a young field engineer, I have 14 days on, 7 days off. I may, some girlfriends and I may go to New York to see some plays, and I say, I'm going to take some time off from shopping or Fifth Ave, and I'm getting ready to go over to the Schlumberger office and just, show my badge, walk in and say, I'm a field engineer in the Gulf of Mexico. Is anyone here around? What are y'all doing in this big, tall office? Because I just always had this attitude. I make the money around here. Y'all are spending the money. And Schlumberger used to be like that. They would always open doors and I would meet senior vice presidents and, because I'd always, and if you stop by in time again, and anytime they asked me, I was working offshore on a long job and they reached out to me and asked me would I present. Back in these days, all our investors would come in town for OTC. And so we had all these new tools and new technology. So Schlumberger closed down the whole, I want to say it was the new stadium, but it might have been the Astrodome. I'm kind of old. The old stadium. Closed down the whole floor. Everybody leave. Schlumberger had a personal party for the whole area during OTC, and we had all of our investors, these New York bankers in, and they wanted field engineers to present the technology. So I remember my mom out shopping for my suit and me out on a rig because they called me and said, Paula, can you come? And I'm sitting there with Grijalva and all of this. I called them Schlumberger gods at the time because these were all the Schlumberger folks out of New York who may or may not have met me or known me. And we're all strategizing together, and I'm this field engineer. So, those kind of relationships and going to sales calls. I talk about these sales calls, but I mean, there are certain things that are so different now. I remember they said, Paula, we're going to go see one of your clients. I'm not sure if you want to go to lunch with us today, because I always call them, hey, I want to go to lunch with you when you take out my clients. I'm not sure you want to go. And I'm like, why wouldn't I want to go? And they're like, well, it's the place we're going. I'm like, you going to a strip club?
Yeah.
Like, come on. And so we are in clients somewhere off of 45 at this place where these ladies are selling negligees, and that's how they're serving us lunch. I'm like, what the crap is this?
Oh my gosh.
And guys don't think about that unless they have Paula Harris sitting there going, so is this? There are no other women here. I mean, they're not naked, but this is lunchtime, guys. We're working our real jobs. This is big. And so, of course, a couple of months later, these places are allowed to. Schlumberger is no longer allowed to take clients, and that's where diversity comes in. That's where people, if everybody's the exact same thing and it's the exact same background and thinking the same way, I'm sure those guys were mortified, or somebody was like, here. That would have ever said that if they didn't have to sit there with me. And I'm looking around going, I can't believe you're having lunch with these ladies in negligees serving us steak and potatoes, So I would say that a lot of your brand, and my brand started really early being very pro diversity and very no nonsense. You ladies know in a doghouse, that you take offshore, everybody wants to sell their wrenches and their nuts and bolts with a lady in a bikini holding the screwdriver, and that's your calendar. And I wouldn't let my guys do that, So I also had this no nonsense. We're here for business. Take that home to your wife. Put that calendar up all over your garage. But if it's Schlumberger property and if it's my crew, who wants to walk and see that? And of course they would give me a hard time. But so many Schlumberger, brass through the years would be like, that's Paula, she doesn't play that on her cruise. You're not going to get out on a crew with her. I'm like, no. And you shouldn't either have naked women out here.
Oh my God.
Posters and pictures. This is absurd. And so, tough, fair, I got along with
Outspoken, like that has been your
Mhm.
brand.
very outspoken,
Mhm.
extremely outspoken. But you know, someone that I had some really good relationships with some of the guys I worked with and their wives and their kids, you know. I mean, when you work in that close vicinity and you have spent night after night, you know, up in that um, unit together, you really know someone and you really have a brotherhood. And Schlumberger is so different because people are promoted. And so the wives were friends. So you're an operator, but now the one guy's a VP, or you know, I become, and I still reach out and talk to your wife, and we're all still friends. So it's not this hierarchy. It's we all started in the field together, and you know, and if your job was to continue in the field, and my job is now global director, I, we're still all friends. You know, and
Well,
I really always enjoyed that about us.
it definitely sounds like your experience at Schlumberger just, overall just really defined you, and you really defined Schlumberger. I mean, you really made your mark and your brand, and, you were there for 33 years, and it was your family. So lastly, we really want to ask you, how does it feel, to no longer, it's not like you're not, I'm sure you're still connected with everybody at Schlumberger. Everybody knows who you are, but you're technically, you don't work there anymore and you're off doing your own thing. What is
Don't
that like?
I call them, I let them call me. But I'm gonna tell you, Jamie, at first, Schlumberger sent out this kind of ominous email. You're about to get an email. This was in May. Corona hit March. This was in May, and said you're about to get an email from HR. Do not delete it. And I hit where I could retire in 2019.
Mhm.
And I always was saying, you know, I'm going to retire, get my full retirement, go get another job. Or it sure feels good when no one can fire you. You can always retire. I mean, I can leave here anytime now. You just
Yeah.
big, bold, talking a lot of smack. I can retire. So I get that email and I was like, I wonder what that's about. And then when I got the email that said, we're offering you a volunteer incentive plan, you know, and you don't have to take it, but you know, if you don't take it, then we could force you to retire without incentives, you know. So you're like, I couldn't even talk about it for 2 weeks. I couldn't tell my mom and dad. I could not talk about it without crying. And I was so upset because I always tell people, my mentors, never let these organizations define you. You are, you know, whoever you are, wherever you are, you and so it also let me know Schlumberger defines me. What am I without Schlumberger? It
Oh
took
my
a
God.
minute. It really took a minute. I was, you know, and my boss left months after I did, and there were people getting laid off,
Left and
left and
right.
right. So we weren't having any retirement parties. People
Mm-hmm.
taking packages. And last year, you know how that went. But I was so, oh, what am I going to do? I was so upset. I couldn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody for a while. And then
It was
once I
like
did,
a divorce. People have
I kept
mentioned
getting
it like
choked
that.
up every time I talked about it. And so I'm accepting the package. Upset every time I talked about it. And then once it happened, now it would have been better if I could travel the world and do a lot of stuff. You know, we were still home, but I absolutely love it. I love it. I do have the company. I am doing consulting. I have some consulting gigs. I do speaking. I serve on however many
You've got a
boards.
full-time job. You're
I
on
Yeah.
have
boards,
tried
on
to get off
speaking.
of some of
You
these
you do
boards.
so
And they're like,
much.
no, we still want you. I'm like, I don't have the big checkbook anymore. It's just me. It's not big Schlumberger, but I'm still on some boards. But still, I don't usually schedule things before 11 because I work out in the morning, you
Ugh,
know?
I love
And
that.
then, you know, it is just, I know I'm going back to work. I think I'm too young and to keep my mind and my physical. I am going to, you know, get these companies going and stay really busy. Spend a lot of time taking care of my parents, a lot. And I wouldn't have been able to do this at all. I mean, today I'm in Houston, but I've been in Egypt, Texas most of this week. But I love it. I love it. I love it. I
So
love
there
it.
is a positive side after that we can look
I love
forward
it.
to.
I love it. I do me and my dog, and we, you know, some days I just piddle, and a lot of days I'm running around and on calls. But I'll be so happy when the world opens back up because a lot of these places I've been around the world 3 or 4 times, as I said, but I've been in hotel meeting rooms
Yeah.
most of the
Mm-hmm.
Now
time,
you
you
can
know.
actually go live and
I can
explore.
Yeah.
take trips and sightsee day and night, and you know, so I'm excited about that kind of stuff too.
Well, Paula, thank you so much for joining us today on Flipping the Barrel. We were looking forward to your interview for months. So we are so happy that you came on. You inspire so many women, and just everything that you do, from being on different school boards and always being a guest speaker and kind of sharing your oil field story. It's just so inspiring to all of us. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed talking to you ladies. I'll talk oil field any day of the week. So congratulations on the podcast. It's excellent. It's excellent. You're doing a really good job and a great service to let other women hear these stories and see you guys too.
Thank you. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Paula.
that.